Welcome into the Think Deeper podcast. I'm your host, Jack Wilkie. This week, I am not joined by Joe Wilkie and Will Harab. They are out on various ministry duties. Joe speaking in the Seattle area, Will counseling at a church camp, and as the one of the three of us who's kind of homebound this summer with the newborn baby twins and just a lot going on, I told them, you guys go ahead and do your thing. We'll schedule an interview for this week, so we'll have an interview episode, but Joe and Will be back with me next week. And with that, let's just go ahead and get into the interview we have for you for this episode. This week we're going to be talking about a requested topic. We've had a few people ask us to do an episode on this, and that is the matter of Christian singleness. It's something that I think needs to be addressed, needs to be covered in the church. And as I was telling Joe and Will, Joe got married right out of college. Will got married almost right out of high school. I was a little later. I got married around 27, and I was telling them one of the most annoying things in the world during those times of looking and not being married was hearing married people talk about singleness. And it was kind of like a pat on the head. And I know they meant well, but like, you know, it's a different world. You know, you're kind of in a different scenario, and so. We wanted to get that perspective a little bit, and so we've brought a guest on this week. Our guest is Cary Gillis. Cary preaches in Texas. Now you're way down in Texas, yes, sir, right?
Yeah, I'm 6 miles from the border.
Oh my. Okay.
All the way down.
Yeah, that's so tell us a little bit about yourself. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me. Well, I am the obvious right up front. I'm 43 and single, and so I wouldn't say I'm an expert on singleness, but I don't really know any other existence.
Sure.
I've been preaching here for 13 years, and I went to, just a little bit of a background, I grew up in Montgomery, Alabama. I went to Faulkner University there, and then a grad school at Freed-Hardeman. I just worked on finished a doctorate a couple years ago through Amridge, which was very convenient that they do all their stuff online. And that's really helped me a lot. It hasn't helped me find a wife yet, but that's okay. I'm actually, right. I'll tell you, this is kind of some new news for me. I just got back from Georgia yesterday. This may come into what we're talking about a little bit, but I just got back from Georgia where I met with the elders of the Forrest Park Church of Christ. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Valdosta, right?
Yes, Wesley Hazel is the preacher there.
Yeah, he wrote a book through us years ago, yeah.
Okay. So, I actually am going to be moving there to be the director of Latin American missions.
Oh, congratulations.
Well, thank you. It's exciting to do that in about a month. And so I haven't even officially publicly announced it here to the congregation, to everybody, because it's brand new. But that kind of, it's interesting how, looking at what we're going to talk about and what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 7, I know, obviously, that a lot of things that I'm going to be able to do are directly tied to me not having a family, not having a wife.
Right.
And not that I wouldn't be able to, but there are some obvious advantages. Mm-hmm. And so I find that is this is an illustrative of some of the things that Paul talks about. So that's where I am in life right now. I'm about to jump off into the deep end of that somewhat unknown. There's a lot of learning that I have to do, but that's an exciting thing that I had the honor of being invited into.
Yeah, that's cool. Congratulations. And, you know, it's funny when I reached out, it's like, this is a really awkward thing to ask. Hey, why don't you come talk about being single? But it's something that's needed. It's something that, as I said, it's been requested, and I think scattered across the country, there are a lot of Christian singles, a lot of people looking for the opportunity. In fact, let's start here with we've kind of Joe and Will and I, as we were talking about what we wanted to ask you to put out there, almost like 3 different categories of single. The kind of gift of celibacy, gift of singleness thing, as Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 7, of, you know, that you can dedicate yourself to the work of the Lord more fully and all that, and kind of the lifelong singleness thing that some people choose and are okay with. And I've known people like that, senior citizens who never got married and didn't ever really have that desire to. The people who are single but looking, want to get married but haven't found the right fit. It just hasn't come their way. God hasn't.
Yeah, that's my category.
Okay, and then kind of one that I think we just want to reject off the top as a very popular one in this day and age. You know, the statistics are about people waiting to get married longer and longer. The average age just goes up and up and up. Of kind of the 20s are for you kind of thing. Go out, live your Instagram lifestyle, travel, have all of those experiences, and then settle down, and then get married, and then try to have kids. And I think a lot of people find they look around at 30 years old and go, there's nobody left. And so, I of the three categories, that one of like chosen singleness, I'm going to serve me for a while. I don't think there's a biblical role for that, but there is very much the other two that I talked about, of kind of lifelong single and okay with it, and just kind of like, this is who I want to be, versus I would like to be married, but God hasn't blessed me that way. And so, do those categories make sense? Does that kind of fit with your reading of 1 Corinthians? That's kind of our major text, is 1 Corinthians 7.
Yeah, I know and have met a handful of people who they they say, no, I never really see myself getting married, and it's not really for me. And I kind of look at them like I don't understand because that's I would like to get married. Um, and of course, the idea that I'm going to be single and just kind of focus on myself, that I believe is where you are single because you don't have the priorities in the right place. Then they're single and looking, which is, I think, I would say that I'm in this category of
Sure.
of being still single because you have your priorities in place. And what I mean by that is a lot of things that I've done some lessons on this, and that were received well and encouraging to single people who struggle with. They want to be married, but they want to be faithful to God. And as the church and the culture are putting out less and less viable candidates, you might say, um, you find people who want to be married, but find difficulty finding someone if they really want to be faithful to God. And so the idea of settling for someone is is not necessarily about um, is not necessarily about they're not pretty enough, or we're not really feeling it, that kind of a thing. Even though I don't know any married couples who say that they didn't experience that. It's more about the idea that if you're really dedicated to God, that your window for a scrutiny of who you're looking to be with is just so slim, really at any age. I think that, of course, it's sort of the joke that people when people go to a Christian school and they're looking for a spouse, right? Um, that's not a bad thing because that's where you'll have a bigger pool of people. Um, where whereas certainly you're going to have faithful and unfaithful Christians who are at the school, and so it can be sometimes deceptive in how many faithful Christians it seems like there are to pick from there. But that's not necessarily a bad thing to do your due diligence and really try to find someone there. I think one of the reasons, and this is not, I'm not saying this as a negative to anyone or anything, but one of the reasons why I think I'm still single is in reflection is that when I was 30, I moved to a place where there were not very many churches. And there's probably 1.5 million people in the Rio Grande Valley where I live,
Hmm.
and maybe 5 or 6 churches,
Oh, wow.
and over about a 2-hour drive from one end to the other. And so I think I had a relationship with, I think, one girl that was from here in the past 13 years.
Mm.
And other than that, it's people who are far away, and so it's part of it is some opportunity. So it's good to seize opportunity, but part of it, and also part of the thing that I talk about my lessons in studying it was trying to trying to show married people, and especially parents who are responsible for raising faithful Christians, is their responsibility to introduce people and make
Hmm.
connections with people.
Right.
That if someone is really wants to be a faithful Christian, that they are not going to be upset, and you're all as if you're in my business, sort of a thing. They're not going to
Hmm.
be upset if someone who knows you're trying to be faithful is trying to make a connection for you with someone who is faithful.
Right.
So that if they know you want to be married, but you want to be married to someone who is going to help you be faithful to Christ, then then it's not just a matter of um, occasionally making a comment about, hey, I have a friend that's somewhere, or many times where someone has said, I wasn't sure if you wanted to know about this person who was single. And what married people, I think, don't realize is that if someone's really trying to be faithful, that we want all of the connect. We want to know about everybody who
Right.
we don't know about,
Right. Cast that broad net.
because
Yeah.
if you're not at a Christian university, chances are you already know who's around you,
Hmm.
and it probably hasn't worked out yet. And so, as a single person, I'll say single people need help, and so married people don't they don't need to feel like they're intruding. It's uh, for And in fact, I'll say this: I have had some Christians who would try to introduce me to people who were not Christians,
Mm.
and I found that to be a sign of spiritual immaturity.
Yeah.
Even as someone who maybe not is not respecting the idea that I want to be faithful to Christ.
Hmm.
And so they were sometimes kind of shocked that I just totally wasn't interested in who they were, kind of referring me to, because, well, they're not faithful Christians. And so it's not just a matter of, hey, you want to be married at all costs to whoever.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people are still single, and it may be increasing more and more within the church, because there's a standard. It isn't just a matter of, well, they don't know how to get along with people, or they're not good in relationships, or that kind of thing. A lot of it is that if you have a high standard and you want to be faithful, but you want to be married, then it may very well be that you may be single for a while.
Hmm.
And so we need help. We do.
Yeah. And that there you hit on a few things there. I want to go into. One, as I mentioned, having a somebody on who's living it. There is such a difference between those that maybe were fortunate and blessed enough to marry their high school sweetheart, or as you said, meet somebody at college, versus in your 20s, 30s, and so on. The difficulty of putting yourself out there, the difficulty of making those connections is something that is just foreign to people like that. And so, like you said, they're the network. They are the help that we have here as a church family. And so, certainly, yeah, be open to that. Be keeping an eye out for your brothers and sisters who are single. And then, as single Christians, take that as a sign of love, as a sign of care. Again, recommend people that are good people. Recommend people that, are honorable people, that are Christians, that have their values in the right place, for sure. That gets to one of the things I want to talk about is a lot of people talk about having a list of desired attributes, and kind of non-negotiables and flexible things and things like that. And I think about Abraham sending the servant to find a wife for Isaac, and it was, you'll not find somebody from among these people. You're not going to do this. Make sure she's this, so that the values were intact, so that the family line was preserved in the way that it should be. You see with Jacob and Esau, go choose a wife from among the daughters here. Don't marry here. Esau doesn't listen, and how poorly that turns out. And so even that concept is kind of a biblically encoded, thing of know what you're looking for. And so with that question of the non-negotiables, what should and shouldn't a Christian be flexible on?
My mother showed me a list that my great uncle made. It was a checklist for his wife died when they were much older, and he made a list of criteria for any woman that would marry him. And he was in his 70s. And this list was hilarious because he was an elder in the church, but it showed such a high level of maturity,
Mm-hmm.
and it had pointed questions like, um, not must be, but it was questions of, okay, what are her personal evangelistic ministries that she's doing?
Wow. Yeah.
And there are certain things that are a matter of this. And this is one of the things my mom tells me that I think we should tell everyone who's really trying to excel in their faithfulness is, seek someone who is your equal. So, okay, what are your goals? And not necessarily someone who has we're all going to be growing, right? But if someone who, say, if you're passionate about evangelism, as we all should be, and there's someone who they've never really thought about it, that's just not even what they do, then to me that would be a non-negotiable. And so you have the physical, the attraction, the chemistry things, those kind of take care of themselves. In fact, someone the more spiritually aligned you find yourself with someone, the more that the other will kind of fade away. Um, and I would recommend you look at yourself for your spiritual goals and who you want to be, and you make some things non-negotiable as far as someone who is going to help you excel at that. That's why there's a lot of one of the main sections of things that I taught about in my lessons on this was how it's a totally foreign idea that a Christian would ever marry a non-Christian. If you're trying to be faithful to Christ and you're going to be joined to someone closer than you're joined to anyone else, and you choose someone who doesn't hold the value that Jesus died for you and you're going to live for him, you're going to join yourself to that person till death do you part. It's just a sort of a foreign concept to someone who is thinking, I have these very specific goals in my personal ministry to God, and I need someone who's going to just come right along beside me, and we're going to help each other in those ways, rather than just attaching myself to someone that I have some similarities with and that I'm attracted to, but is not really all about those things. That shows a great lack of spiritual maturity and underestimating the things that are the priorities and giving priority to things that ultimately don't even matter. And so I would just, it's not a matter of specific things on a list.
Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of what are your spiritual goals, and what is the type of person who aligns with those, can help you just go all in on those things, and you have a total singular mindset that you're one in the flesh, you're one in the spirit in those things, that
Right.
that even, you know, not necessarily as a preacher, but could be that you are a ministry team, just one unit, and whatever list that makes for you, then I would say that's what the priority would be, and don't be flexible in those things, and
Right.
understand that there's also growth. It's a matter
Mm-hmm.
of what do you want and what are you working towards.
So, well, we had a episode series on gender, male, female, and then marriage and those kinds of things. And one of the things we talked about is that trope of, you know, that guys are kind of expected to say, "Oh, I married up. She's my better half. I'm not worthy of her. I don't know what she was thinking marrying me." And it's kind of, well, okay, live up to it, you know, grow into
Mm-hmm.
that. And it's
Right.
in the same sense of like your list of, if you know, if you want somebody who's a strong Christian, be that. And so don't be the person that's always looking at, and I know it's trying to be flattering of the wife and all that, but it's like, man, step up, be that person, and meet the list that you're expecting of someone else, as you said, kind of on this, running the same direction, you're equal, all that. I think that's really important to keep in mind.
You know, one thing I'll say about personally, you know, in going in the vein of being that person, when you're really growing into that person, that's naturally going to put you in the company of people who are like that. And one of the things that I've thought of is, if you know, diving into Latin America missions and all that that entails, that's going to put me in places and align me with groups and people, and perhaps with a potential spouse who is all about those particular things, that they have these particular goals too, and I'm kind of trusting God to align me with perhaps a wife who prioritizes those same things, who when they see what I'm doing, they're thinking, yeah, that's what I'm all about too. And so there's a way that you can put yourself in good company by really trying to grow in those ways. I
It
think you're
makes
totally
sense.
right about that.
I think I've heard it said, you know, run towards Christ with all your might, look to your left and
Mhm.
right, and see
Yeah.
who's running with you, running next to you.
And
Um,
you'll find some unlikely characters there. You
mm-hmm.
know, so you'll find people you don't have anything in common with, and they become your closest fellow soldiers,
Right,
and perhaps one of those will be a spouse.
right.
Yeah.
So I want to get to what the church can do. I want to talk first about the singles individual battle, strengths and weaknesses. There's you know, we mentioned earlier that Paul talks about advantages that singles have serving in the kingdom. But first, the temptations that come their way. The first one is sexual temptation, but you know, maybe something like envy or bitterness and things like that can set in as well. And I mean, it was kind of the same thing. As I mentioned, I was in my later 20s when I got married, And you just kind of look around, and everyone around you is getting married, and it's like, wow, thanks, God, you're forgetting somebody here, and you deal with that, and it's not a thing that you should be thinking, but I dealt with things like that, and so there's just different temptations that single Christians face that maybe others don't, or that take different forms, and so speak to any and all of that, however you want to address that.
It's funny that actually reminds me of a lesson I did just a couple days ago. I was in Valdosta and they asked me to speak, and I wanted to do a lesson on one of my studies that's helped me and impacted me the most, and that's from 1 Peter 2:23, talking about Jesus as the example. But in particular, uh, Peter gives us insight into the mind of Christ that we don't find in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, which is specifically that he continually entrusting himself to the Father, and that's how he was able to not give up. And but that's a broad application. You can broadly apply that to any difficulty in your life. So if you're single and you're thinking, why have I been passed up? And a lot of what I've seen from people who are older and single who want to be married is they do have some bitterness. They do have some difficulty. A lot of it has to do with some of the other things that I wanted to discuss, which has to do with their value versus perceived value. They could be kind of bitter that you're not normal, and so that's a sad thing. But okay, so you want to be married. You see other people that are not. You feel slighted. You feel like, why not me? Um, but if you're being faithful to God and you're continually giving that over to Him, letting Lord, I just pray for Your will to be done. Uh, you, I'm going to let You carry this load. I don't have to carry. I can't carry this burden alone. You know better than I do. You know the future. I don't. You can do that, and you can be single. I've told people. I said, you know what? I want to be married, but I'm really happy single. Not that I want to be single, but I'm happy because if I'm being faithful to God, He empowers me to be content and happy, which tells me this. If I never get married, I already know just based on my life that I can be happy and productive and not bitter, even if I don't have what I wanted. Because your physical status, and this is part of 1 Corinthians 7, is where he says, if you're he goes through a list of not just married and single, but a list of things about perceptions or different places in your life. If you have a lot, act like you're poor. If you don't have much, act like you have a lot. Really, what he's saying there is he's saying um, your physical status is always temporary. Your spiritual status is what is eternal. Okay, so you're in 1 Corinthians 7, he's talking about your divided heart, that you're a divided focus away from Christ. He says, if you're married, act like you're single. If you're single, act like you're married. The idea that you don't need to be consumed by your physical status. You need to be consumed by Christ. That whatever physical status you cannot let that become your identity. Your identity has to be Christ. And so that helps you be content. That helps you do away with bitterness. You entrust that. You give that over to God, and you let Him take care of that. Understanding that even if a person who their status is of being married that's their pride and joy and whatever. Well, guess what? You're not going to be married forever. Statistically, if you look, it's interesting. You just kind of Google, what percentage of people are single. It's 50%. Now that includes kids, that includes unmarried people. Excuse me, non-Christians. Of course, Christians are going to have a higher percentage. They have a higher percentage of marriage because they believe that the sanctity of relationship and sexual purity. But everybody has been single who is married, and one of the two spouses, unless they're on the same plane crash, one of them is going to be single when the other one dies. And if we don't focus on that and understand that being married is not is not the quote unquote norm, but that being single is just a momentary status, just like marriage is a momentary status. So we ought not be consumed by that to the extent that we feel like our value is tied to it, or be bitter and jealous of others. Because I have a few dear friends I grew up with. They're on their second marriages or second divorces, and they've experienced a whole lot of misery that I haven't. And they probably look at me with some envy, you know.
Mm.
And instead of us defining our status by Jesus, or letting the status of being in Christ be the status that we define our lives by, rather than these temporary things. Um, and then, and I guess maybe we'll get into the idea of your value and what you bring to the table in the way that Paul did. But before we get into
Yeah.
that, before we get into that, I guess the idea of sexual purity and things like that. That's where the church needs to help single people. Single people need to help single people. If you're don't introduce your non-Christian friend who doesn't have those values to your single Christian friend, because there's a lot. Because if there's just one person who has that conviction to be pure and the other one does not, it's hard enough when there are two who have that conviction. And so I would say when there are two, here's the reality of it is that people who are not convicted about that, they're going to do whatever they want to do, even if they're Christians, and they'll be able to hide it if they want to, and they'll have that facade up. But if there are those who are truly committed to it, and they're looking for someone who's truly committed to that, then that's one thing that in my relationships I've vocalized with someone. I've said, look, this temptation is real, but this is what I want. I want us to have a pure relationship, and it has to be something we both agree upon. Which means that when you do that, you enlist the church to help you do that, so that they can help facilitate situations where those temptations are mitigated, you might say. And so the church can help a lot with that. It's the church is not getting into your business when you say, "Hey, you got a friend coming? Well, they can stay at our house if when they're visiting town or however that is." Um, giving situations and environments, ways that you can aid single people, so that they can go through a courtship process, so to speak, in a successful way that mitigates temptation. I appreciate so much uh, those who are around me who are mindful of that and who encourage me with that. And I'll tell you, being a single preacher, there's a lot of scrutiny, and there's um, a lot of joking, or where kind of people kind of pick at you, and
Hmm.
it's not fun to be in the spotlight looking for a spouse, I'll tell you
Yeah.
that.
I've been
um
there.
yeah, but at the same time, if those people can also, you don't I mean, you can, you're tough enough to get through that kind of stuff, right? Unless you're just a wimp. But it's when you can enlist people around you to say, I need y'all's help.
Hmm.
This is what I want. And uh and so, like I said, if someone wants that, then they can have that, and they can align themselves with people around them who will help them have that.
That makes a lot of sense. I
If
like that
that's
idea of bringing the
if
church
that's
in
what
on
they
it.
want, yeah, if that's what
Yeah.
they want. And one of
Right.
the things that I'll tell you, it's funny. In one of my lessons, I called out parents, and I said, parents, we need your help. Say, yes, we kind of think of arranged marriages as kind of funny, but no, no, parents, go ahead, conspire together. We may not hit it off, but we need your help. You may hit the jackpot for us with somebody we didn't know about. And after that lesson was over with, I had a message from my mom where a lady had contacted her who saw my lesson, trying to hook me up with her daughter. And you know what? I'm not necessarily interested in her daughter. Her daughter's a great Christian girl, but I really appreciated that.
Yeah.
I was very thankful, because there's a role that we have of helping each other be faithful, and as a preacher, here's the thing: I'm able to do some things. We think about, okay, when we get into perceived value versus true value of a single person. Okay,
Yeah.
I read somewhere. Yeah,
We've
what's
got a
that?
hierarchy in the church, right? It's married with kids,
Right, right, right.
married, then single, right?
Yeah,
Like among people in the 20 to 50 range, and
right.
every church, a family walks in with 2 or 3 kids, everyone flocks to them, and there's a single. It's we got a group for you over there.
Right. And so you're kind of ostracized, or you kind of feel like your value is diminished. So very quickly, and I know this seems kind of cliche, where people say, well, Jesus and Paul were single. Okay, well, there's some important things to notice about that. They Jesus and Paul had specific goals. And I even read somewhere, I don't necessarily believe this, but I read somewhere where one commentator thought that Paul abandoned his family, abandoned his wife in order to do what he was able to do. The only reason they said that was they said it would have been very unlikely for Paul as a Jewish leader to be unmarried. And so it's very likely that he was married and then abandoned his wife and family. There's no evidence for that, right? There's no evidence. But the reason that that's interesting for me is because of this. The reason they come to that conclusion is because it seems as if, I think if we're honest, we can kind of see this. If we look at the ministry of Paul, we think, I don't know if he could have done that with a family in tow. And so when you look at Jesus and Paul, you look at their goals, you look at all the travel campaigns of Paul, Timothy, Silas, John Mark, Barnabas. Did they have families? I don't know. Did John Mark, did he leave the team because he had a girlfriend, somewhere, and he wanted to have a family? I don't know, but it's possible that these guys were doing things that they wouldn't be able to do if they had a family in tow. That's one of the reasons why, I'm going to be able to do some things with Latin American missions right off the bat. That if I had a family, it would be a little tough. But because I don't, I'm going to take advantage of that. And Paul was able to take advantage of that. And so there are things that hey, look, I do a lot of door knocking, evangelism, mission trips, stuff like that. Primarily, the people that do that stuff are the single people. And so when they understand their value and that's, Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 7, the value that you bring to the table when you don't have your focus divided materially, maximize that and understand and let churches, I kind of think of it this way, let churches see the single people as their secret weapons instead of, oh, well, they're kind of low on the hierarchy, as you say, and understand that there are things that families and with kids, there are things that they can do that single people cannot do, and let them maximize their efforts for the church in the ways that they can, understanding that every member of the body of Christ is equal value, and that I talked about it this way, I, when my first job, I was the guy that would cook French fries at a fast food restaurant. I didn't make the burgers, I didn't do the cash register, but I don't do that anymore. But that was my function, and I was good at it. And when I left, someone entered into that function. And people within the body of Christ, they may be the guy that specializes at cooking the fries right now, but that's supposed to be only temporary. A kid does that. As they grow in their faith, they grow into another function within the church. There isn't anyone that's not valuable, but as we grow, perhaps we can move to more responsibilities as we go. So let's look at married and single people as what can they maximize at within the church as far as their respective ministries, and understand and respect the fact that each of them have the opportunities that the other ones don't have, and just utilize, because when a single person is being utilized over and over and over and over within the church, what does that do to the bitterness that they may have had, or the discontentment, or the lack of value? And that's where you get into the difference between perceived value versus true value. And there's a stigma attached to single people that is just wrong, because of the perceived norm of where you're supposed to be in life, rather than entrusting that to God and let Him work that out for you. It may be that you don't need to get married until you're 50, because there's certain things within the kingdom that He really needs from you that you wouldn't be able to do if you had a family. And if you trust God with that, you can be content and be okay with that. That may be where I find myself, and I have to be okay with that. And I am okay with that because I trust God with that. He knows the future. He knows better than me what I need to be doing. He knows certain opportunities that perhaps if I were married, I would not be able to do for the church if I had a wife. And so perhaps he's waiting on that. And I'm totally okay with that. And so we need to encourage single people, and really everybody within the church, to look at it through that lens, so that both the married and the single are equally empowered So just let God use them and entrust their future to God.
It makes a lot of sense. Paul gets at like concerns and commitments to your wife, to your kids, and all that, and so
Hmm.
those are big factors. But all other things being equal, time alone is
Hmm. Yes.
such an advantage of
Yeah.
single people, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
I mean, having to get kids to bed, having to get them dressed, having to get them fed, having to do all the things, or with a wife, you need to put that time in and all that. As a single minister, there were things where just calls that I got, hey, we got this going on, can you come by? Sure. Like, what else am I doing? And so, like you said, the secret weapons of the church thing, I really like that because number one, they have that time, but number two, as you kind of got at, it's giving them purpose. Purpose goes a long way towards our strength, our mental health, our feeling valued, feeling loved, feeling necessary, and so putting the singles to work. I got a few minutes left. I don't want to keep you here too long, so let's do these last couple of little rapid fire. And I know you've got some other points to bring in with them. What do you wish other Christians knew? We've gotten at this a little bit about like helping singles and all that, but as singles kind of get relegated to second-class citizens in the church, what do you wish other Christians knew about how to connect with singles, how to show love to singles, how to support and just bring singles in? What is something you would tell somebody if they asked you that? How can we help you? How can we help singles?
I just treat them normal. Just they don't see themselves as abnormal. And it's funny when a couple gets married sometimes, then their single friends kind of treat them differently. I remember someone that got married one time. She said, we're still the same people.
Right.
You can treat us the same.
Right.
Even though we're married, we would treat them differently. And I would just say, just treat them as a part of the body of Christ, and and appreciate them for their faithfulness and what they have to offer to the body. Um, but but a lot of what single people need that they don't get is just a sense of normalcy. I'm just someone who's normal. In other words, um, not and this goes to what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7 about not letting your relationships in the church, the work within the church, the way that we even divide people up within the church, that there doesn't need to be a preoccupation with your physical status. Paul says, okay, well, you're poor, you're not going to be poor forever. You're rich, you're not going to be rich forever. You're single, not forever. You're married, not forever, because this life is temporary. Okay, so let's 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 big picture this thing. Let's look at people the way God sees people. Treat people the way God treats people, instead of doing what I think is the lazy thing to do, which um, is treating people at face value. Single people, I think they're really that stirs up bitterness, discontentment when they are treated at face value rather than seen as someone who is. And I think this is the key, is my marriage is to Christ. My faithfulness is to him. And when a married person doesn't share that same the ultimate defining characteristic, rather than, well, I'm married and that kind of defines who I am. When you then that will connect people. That will show people that like for instance, that when I was with the elders this past weekend, it never brought up as an issue, because they weren't defined by their marital status. They're defined by their dedication to Christ, and they treated me the same way. We're equals in the body in that sense, and so to be treated in that way, I think it can be rare. It takes some effort.
Yeah, I think I get the impulse behind singles groups and things like that, and I think there
Hmm.
is a value in getting people together,
Yeah,
maybe
there
offering
is.
opportunity. But then on the whole, as kind of the you go be over there, and we do that to everybody, right? Youth,
Hmm.
teenagers, you go over here. You've got your own church. Single people, you got your own church. Young marrieds and young families got your own church, and the elderly, the senior citizens, they got their own church, and that bringing everybody together is important. As you said, treating people not by their temporal physical status of you're part of the family. If you're a teenager, you're part of the family. If you're single, you're part of the family. If you're 75 years old, you're part of the family. And in the same way, you come together with your family for a reunion, for Thanksgiving or whatever. Nobody goes, oh, you're a single, so that table is for you over there. It's we all sit down and have turkey together, right? And so as Christians, I think that's an important thing for us to do as well.
That I'm a big advocate of what in my studies I did some work on this in my dissertation about there's stratification within the church. There's this group, this group, this group, this group, rather than intergenerational mindset, intergroup mindset, you might say. A mission, where a mission trip or evangelistic work or different ministries within the church or certain events, if it can be all ages, all statuses, if we can make that a norm, then that's good for mentoring. That's good for helping single people feel normal. It's not to say there's not a good time to say the single people are going to go do this thing because they don't have kids, they don't have a wife, they're free to kind of do that stuff, and it's good for them perhaps to try to find a spouse. There's totally a place for that, but part of the norm needs to be a eclectic, if you will, a total mixture of what the body of Christ looks like in the micro scale even. I think that's a very healthy thing to do rather than just dividing people up all the time. That inadvertently becomes ostracizing and gives a perception of the hierarchy, gives a perception of different values, or different, what this group brings to the table versus what that group brings to the table.
Okay, I think that kind of answers the last one I was going to ask. What can the church as a whole do better for singles? And so, are there other points you want to make before we kind of wrap here? Other things? I know I kind of threw an outline together and gave it to you. You had some points to get to, and so I want to make sure we didn't miss anything you had to bring to the table today.
Ultimately, the goal is faithfulness.
Right.
The goal is faithfulness for everyone. So if my goal is faithfulness, then that gives me clarity as to my purpose, as to my decisions, and how I navigate the single world. Let's see here. I think there needs to be more empathy between marrieds and singles. It's easy for a single person to look at married people and think, "Oh, that's what I want. It's the best." When married people are looking at them like, "I don't have any idea how hard this is." Okay, there needs to be some empathy there, but also it needs to be where the married people can look at the single people and say, "Yeah, I know what you're going through," even though there needs to be a healthy respect of what each person is going through, and to talk about that, to vocalize that, to make that a normal thing that is mentioned. Because one thing I'll say is being single. Whenever my dad's passed away, so whenever my mom would come and visit, I would say this: she would validate me as a real person worth, with some value. Someone who's single doesn't have a spouse who decided to attach themselves for life to them, to validate them as a person who's worthy of being with, right? If I'm single, I don't have that as an immediate validation of who I am and the value that I have. And so when my mom would show up, she would kind of validate me as a real person, which is a weird thing to think. I don't know if married people realize that about single people, that we kind of feel like we don't have someone to validate us. Okay, well, then as the church, we need to validate each other and our value and what we bring to the table. But one of there are different statuses of single, the widows, and even those who are divorced. There are different categories of being single, and they need attention, and they need help, or they need understanding for what each of them are going through respectively. And one of the things that Jesus addresses right after he gives really the foundation for marriage, divorce, and remarriage in Matthew 19:9 is then he goes into right after that. They say, well, how can anybody be married, right? And then he says, well, there are some who were made eunuchs. There are some who were born that way. There are some who did it and it was not in their control. There's some who were born that way, and there's some who chose to do it for the sake of the kingdom. And so he says, for those, and within the context, the best that I can say is that he's saying, look, there are some people who are divorced They don't have a right to remarry. They want to be faithful to God, and they're going to be dedicated to being single or be a eunuch for, chosen for the sake of the kingdom. And those are a very special group of people that must be revered, who are it's not that it's easy for them. Like Paul was saying, I think maybe it was a little easier for Paul to be single, and he wished that it were for other people. Okay. But it may be that someone, they're they really want to be married, and maybe they can't, and they have dedicated themselves to being single because they want to be faithful to God. In my mind, I elevate them in my mind as someone to be revered. But as far as we think of single people who maybe want, I want to be married, but right now, for the sake of the kingdom and faithfulness to God, um, in my singleness, that's kind of the category I find myself in, is I'm choosing to be pure because I'm going to be faithful to God, until I can find someone who will even help me maximize my faithfulness to God. And so I think it's interesting that even Jesus addresses that. And I would even say this: 1 Corinthians 7 is a response to questions that were sent to Paul. He's saying, let me address some questions you had. Well, they had questions about, what do we do with married and single people? And so it's not just that it's mentioned in 1 Corinthians 7, it's that the early church, they had questions that they were trying to figure out. And by inspiration, Paul was able to address these things. And it's healthy for us to address these questions they're going to persist throughout the generations. And we find that addressed as a response to the question of it in 1 Corinthians 7. There's a lot more we could say, but I think that kind of covers a lot of. We didn't get to 2 Corinthians 6 about being unequally yoked, but,
Yeah.
but we did really.
Right. About people trying to set you up and all that. Great stuff. I think this is a really great episode. Very useful.
Well,
Again,
I'm honored
it's
to talk about it.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. Like I said, it's like I don't want this to be insulting, to reach out and hey, you're the guy to talk about this, but
it doesn't. No, I wasn't because.
Yeah. Well, I know you do a great job with it, and
I tried to grow in my spiritual maturity to not be defined by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so no, I was honored that you asked, because
All
this is a helpful thing for people to discuss.
Yeah, I think so. So I'm sure we've got people listening who aren't single, but your kids, if you're raising kids, I know we got people who listen with their kids, prepare them for this, because there's no guarantee that the high school sweetheart or the college sweetheart is going to come along. And so, even if you get married that way, you're going to be around people. You're going to have Christians, and here's how you can help them. And so a little bit of something for everybody in here. I really want to thank Cary for joining us. If you are not Facebook friends with Cary or not following him, he's one of the consistent best Facebook posters. So go find Cary Gillis on Facebook.
That. I feel the same way about you.
Well, I appreciate
Very
it.
encouraging, good, challenging stuff.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and best of luck, and God bless the work with Latin American Missions. Very cool. Very cool.
Appreciate your prayers with that. Yes, sir.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, and we will talk to you guys next week on Think Deeper.